Hey team. So we're going to take a look at control structures, specifically conditional statements in this video. We're going to be looking at three kinds. We're going to see about if-then statements, ternary statements, and then switch case statements, all within the Swift programming language. Some of you have already used some if-then statements in some of the code that you've written. So let's take a look at some simple examples of how if-then code works. So in this code, I've defined a variable called hours of sleep, and I've created an if-else statement, or an if-then statement, to print out a statement based on the value of that variable. So if hours of sleep is greater than or equal to 8, it prints out you slept enough. Otherwise, it prints out a statement that you did not sleep enough. Since hours of sleep is 8, when we run this code, it prints out that you slept enough because hours of sleep is 8, 8 is greater than or equal to 8, therefore it prints out this statement. If we reduce this to 6 and run the code, this statement prints out because 6 is not greater than or equal to 8, and so this statement, this block of code right here, is what is called. And so this if-else statement will either do everything that is in this block of code or this block of code. We can actually add in other cases, because let's say that maybe if we've slept 10 hours, that's even too much. So I'm going to add in another case. I'm going to change this to greater than or equal to 10, and I'm going to change this to say you slept too much. And I'm going to add in an else if statement in the middle of this. So if hours of sleep is greater than or equal to 10, you slept too much. If hours of sleep is less than 10 and hours of sleep is greater than or equal to 8, we'll say you slept a reasonable amount, and otherwise we're going to say you did not sleep enough. So now we have three cases. So this structure here makes it so that if hours of sleep is greater than or equal to 10, it prints out this statement. If it is less than 10 and also greater than or equal to 8, we slept a reasonable amount, and otherwise that means that the hours of sleep would be less than 8, you did not sleep enough. We need this AND operator in the middle to check that the hours of sleep variable is between 10 and 8. We have to check both of these in order to know that hours of sleep is within that range. So this is an if-else control structure. Let's now take a look at the ternary control structure. But before we do that, I'm going to write an if-then statement that's going to illustrate how we use it. So here I've defined a variable called temperature, and I've said that if the temperature is greater than 25, it is too hot, and otherwise it'll print it is a comfortable temperature. So this is a pretty standard if-then statement, but I want to show you how we can actually do this in the situation where we want to use the ternary operator. It makes things a little more concise when we use this operator. Let me show you how. So imagine that I have a temperature string and I want to print it out, but I want to set the temperature string to be one of two things based on whether it is too hot or not. So here's what I do. First, I write a comparison, use a comparison operator inside parentheses, and then I can use a question mark, and this is where the ternary operator comes in. If the temperature is greater than 25, I want the string to be it is too hot. If it is false, I want the string to be equal to this. And so by using this ternary operator, I'm actually making all of this happen in a single line. So it can make the code a little bit more straightforward, and I don't need all of this if-else stuff because I know I'm only going to use this result or this one based on this statement being true or false. And so temperature is 20. If I run this code, we can see it as a comfortable temperature, which is the same result as what happened using this if-else structure. So the ternary says we have a statement here. If it is true, it will be equal to this first value. If it is false, the operator will give this second value. Now let's talk about switch case. So here is a switch case statement that I've put together regarding a number of cupcakes. And so you can see that I have a variable that I've defined as number of cupcakes. I'm going to put that as 2 for now. A cupcake comment, which is a string. And then I have the actual switch statement. And what I'm going to add at the end is a print statement that's going to print out the cupcake comment. And so that cupcake comment variable is going to have a value based on which of these situations applies. Now a switch case statement lets you deal with, it lets you input a variable that you're going to use to determine which case is going to apply based on its value. So you can describe a number of different cases this way. So in the case of number of cupcakes being equal to 0, this is our statement. We can say in the case of it being 1 or 2, and that comma just means that it's, in this case, in the case that number of cupcakes is 1 or 2, it's going to have this value. And then we can continue defining different situations for a cupcake comment in case there are 3, 4, or 5, saying that maybe there are too many cupcakes if it has that value. A switch case statement also needs to have a default case, which means what is cupcake comment going to be in the situation where number of cupcakes is none of these. And so you have to give it a default value in the case that it's not one of these. So all you do is you do default, the default case, you put a colon after default, and then you set its value. And so when we run this, you'll see that it's going to print out that it's a reasonable cupcake count because number of cupcakes is 2. But if we make this 20 and we run the code, cupcake comment is going to be definitely too many cupcakes. Now there are a couple other ways that we can actually write this. Like you can think of some situations where maybe it's a lot of work to say 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So we can actually define these in terms of ranges if we want to. So I could say, let's say that the case instead, I want this to be between 1 and 2, including 2. Oops. So I go from 1 to 2, and let me put this back to 2. And this says everything between 1 and 2. Let's say that maybe 3 to 5 is too many cupcakes. And so we can now use this, which is interval notation, in order to say that in all of these cases, this, in the case between 1 and 2, this is what cupcake comment should have. So here is one more example of how we can use the switch case statement. In this case, I've defined a variable of my speed, and I've defined a speed limit. And so based on the value of my speed, I want to print a statement that describes whether it describes my speed relative to the speed limit. So you can see here that I am saying all numbers between 0 up to, but not including the speed limit. I'm going to print not fast, or maybe not speeding at least. And in the case my speed is equal to the speed limit, I print right on, and otherwise I'm going to print too fast. And so you can see right now, if I run the code, my print statement is right on because I am right at the speed limit. But if I increase that to 50, 450, how about 50, and run the code, I'm definitely going too fast. So in this case, I'm not directly saying every single number. I'm using a variable in my range, but this is how you would say everything between 0 up to but not including the speed limit. And then it has the default case as well. There's one more situation with switch case that I want to show you. So this is one more switch case statement, but so far I've only given you examples that involve numbers, and I want you to know that switch case statements can also use strings and all sorts of variable types actually. So this is how this works. So if house is Hydra, I want it to print you are in Mr. Weinberg's house. Otherwise, if you're in Shenlong, Naga, or Wyvern, you are not in Mr. Weinberg's house. So if I run this, obviously here you are in Mr. Weinberg's house, but if I change this to Naga, let's run it one more time, then it's going to print that you are not in Mr. Weinberg's house. Now, I want to show you one thing that sometimes can happen that you need to take into account when you're dealing with statements like this. So let's say that I put capital N in there, and I run the code. You'll see here that something went wrong because I put in capital N, I used my switch house statement, and capital N-A-G-A does not match up with the lowercase n-a-g-a for house Naga. And so this is not the print statement that is done. And so the house is not Hydra. It's not one of these. And so this something went wrong statement shows us that there's something going wrong. So sometimes what you can do to check this is because house is a string, you can actually take house and you can make it show just the lowercase version. And so that now when I run this, even though I have entered capital N as the first letter in Naga, this house.lowercase converts this whole string to lowercase and then compares it. And this can be really useful when you're checking a bunch of different values and you just you're not sure whether your user is going to capitalize or not capitalize something before you compare it to a bunch of situations. And so processing the value in some way before it is compared to each of the cases can be really useful. The last thing I'll say about switch case is that it is really valuable in situations where you have a bunch of different comparisons to do. If we go back to this hours of sleep comparison, you see that if hours of sleep is greater than or equal to 10, you do one thing. Otherwise, if it's between this and this, you do this. Imagine that you were checking 3, 4, or 5 different ranges like we did here. If we wanted to do this cupcake statement with if-then statements, we'd have to have a few complex conditional statements in order to account for this. So switch case can be a really efficient way to set a value based on conditions when you have a lot of different conditions that are possible in your situation. So that's it for basic conditional statements. We've covered if-then, ternary, and switch case.